All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We're just dealing with the inevitable technical challenges that come with connecting to multiple endpoints and what are sometimes some challenging locations. We're hoping to have some guests join us from Beirut, Lebanon today. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in and who's stuck around. So my name is Eric Maddox, and I am the co-host of Latitude Adjustment Podcast. My co-host, Laila Mokhiber, is coming to us from Washington, D.C. You can see that her little box is blacked out right now because she is trying to troubleshoot the internet issues with Beirut. So hopefully we'll have a couple more guests joining with her help. So a little bit of background for those who haven't heard the podcast before or who aren't familiar with these live shows. We do host a typical audio-only format podcast that covers underreported issues, places, and communities around the world. And you can find that podcast. It's latitudeadjustmentpod.com, or you can find it in most places you find podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and most of the apps you would use on Android to subscribe. So be sure to do that as well. And these live events are more of a new offering that we've been doing for about, I think a month and a half. This is the sixth one that we've done. And this one is going to be focusing on the Kafala System. And the Kafala System is our guest will describe it in more detail, but to give you a rough outline, it's the system that's set up to monitor and manage and recruit migrant laborers, specifically in the Gulf, as well as Lebanon and Jordan, I believe. And we are going to have guests who are joining us from a variety of different locations today. So Layla's working on Beirut. We'll have a couple of activists who are also laborers themselves, workers themselves, as well as Anne, who's in Kuwait, and Vani, who I interviewed for a previous episode on this topic. And you should be sure to go and check that out too at the link that's already provided in the comments. So Anne, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself and as well as your organization and where you are right now?
Yeah, I am Anne from the Philippines, but I am currently residing here in Kuwait, where I decided to work 20 years ago as a domestic worker. In 2008, we began advocating for the rights of the domestic workers. To give you an idea of our situation prior to the intervention of organization like ours, like the Sandigan Kuwait, before we don't have the domestic workers law. There is no law that protects our rights or the rights of the domestic workers. We don't have clear system to access to justice. If there are any violations, we are not allowed to use mobile. We don't have our day off. We know that there are a lot of abuses, but nobody talks about abuses. Nobody talks about domestic workers. We know that each home have a domestic worker, but nobody sees us and know our concerns. We are the invisible part of the society. I am once part of the invisible and voiceless society. So I am Anne. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne. And Vani, would you like to introduce yourself? Make sure to unmute your microphone. And if you can introduce yourself, also what your work is, where you're located, and if you want to provide a description of what the Kafala system is too, feel free.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Vani Saraswati. I work with migrantrights.org. Migrantrights.org is one of a kind advocacy platform in the Gulf. It's a bilingual platform. And what we do is we research, report, analyze reforms in the country with the intent to change the attitudes and behaviors of people towards not just migrant labor, but migration itself. How they view the need for migration and how they view the impact of migration. So this, Laila, successful. And a good part of our work is online, and you can see it on our site. And we do quite a bit of work at the grassroots level where we engage with various stakeholders. We don't always work directly with migrant workers. We've started doing that because of the pandemic, and I'll talk about that later. But what we try and do is work with stakeholders like employers, individual employers, businesses, groups such as ANTS, and also recruitment agents, and try and see how they could change their practices. So the whole idea around migrantrights.org is to have, the team is all local. I used to live in Qatar for 17, 18 years. I'm now based in Bangalore, but I go back and forth. And the work continues to be in GCC and the corridors of migration. And what we want to do is to have, our critical analysis to be context specific. So it's not, fly by night activism where we come in when there is a big event and talk about human rights violations in the Gulf. The work we do is daily, kind of just monitoring what's happening on the ground. The reason this is important is Eric did give quite an good description of what the kafala is. But what the kafala is just a migration management system. The kafala then interplays with a lot of other, not always fair legislative codes within each of these countries. So there are labor laws. In 4 out of the 6 Gulf countries, there is a domestic workers law, because for some reason they decided that domestic work isn't labor and they'll not be included in the labor law. There are 2 countries that do not even have that. And so there are all of these other mechanisms that the kafala interplays with and influences. And as you know, the labor law would come under the Ministry of Labor, but the kafala comes under the Ministry of Interior. And there's an aspect of security. So a lot of the violations and exploitation of migrant labor is justified in the name of national security, and in the justified because you don't want to dilute the so-called national identity. So what we try and do with our regular reporting is to call that out, to call out how false that is, and to call out how terribly, how horribly it impacts migrant workers. And we see that now. The worst of it we see now in COVID. None of this should have come as a surprise for anybody. People are sounding surprised, but it shouldn't, because we've had this happening for decades in the Gulf. COVID is just one more problem that the Gulf is facing in managing migrants under the kafala. I'm going to stop here and then...
Thank you. Can I actually jump in real quick so we can introduce? I have on WhatsApp, on my side, on my phone, both Esther and Sarah, who are calling from Beirut. So Esther, can you tell us where you are exactly and where you're from originally?
Okay, I'm in Lebanon, Beirut, okay. But I'm a citizen of Kenya. I come from Kenya.
And can you tell us what brought you to Beirut?
I came to work. I came as a worker. As well as, when you're back in Africa, they'll tell you you're coming to do a certain job. When you reach here, you find yourself you're doing a housework. I came and did housework, but I did not finish a year. I came out. So I'm not in contract. I'm just outside. I'm not in contract.
Okay. And Sarah, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I came in Lebanon in 2011, and I stayed here like almost 10 years. I never go back. I'm from Ethiopia, Africa. If you notice, I guess some of you know about Ethiopia. I guess I'm from there, and I've never go back to my country. And I'm not an employer of anyone. I'm a freelancer. That means like I ran away a long time ago, like in 2012, after 1 year. So yeah.
Thank you both so much.
And if I can ask a follow-up question really quick to both of the women who are joining us from Beirut. So, and answer this question only if you feel comfortable doing so. But if I understand it right, this means that your immigration status is kind of not official as a result of not having being tied to a specific employer. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That means like I am not holding something called ikamo. Here they put it like as a sponsorship, like it's just like a piece of paper that you hold if you have. Not actually, you don't hold it. The employers would be holding it, but yeah, I don't have actually that one since I ran away from them.
Okay, as for me, it's the same as Sarah. Me too, I don't have the ikama. I'm just working without the ikama for now, because all my details are with my employer.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
That means
just to, go ahead.
that we are undocumented, both of us.
Yes. Which, from what I understand, based on my prior interview with Vani, is a common situation where if somebody terminates your employment or just decides not to pay you, or for whatever reason, you lose your connection to your employer, that's your ticket to stay in the country. So you can just immediately become undocumented. And based on what I've read about Lebanon, this isn't just true of the Gulf. This is true in all the places where the Kafala system is applied that I'm aware of. So yeah, your employer is your right to be in the country. They are essentially your visa. And yeah, I mean, you said the rest. So I'd like to, in the interest of time management, we're going to need to not address every question to each person. So I'm just going to, unfortunately, have to just kind of pick certain people. But if somebody feels very strongly that they need to speak up about answering a certain question, feel free to do that. So, Anne, I'd like to ask you, what kinds of employers and what kinds of workers are using the Kafala system? Who does this?
Okay. Yeah, most of the countries are using the Kafala system or the sponsorship system. It only varies on the definition and provision that stipulates in the system. So the implementation as well. Like in the United States or other countries, migrant workers needs a sponsor for us to work in that country. But in the Middle East, it's different. The Kafala system is more on owning the person under the system, which is the migrant workers. So it's like owning the person. Kafala system also hinders the growth of the migrant workers. It suppresses the freedom of movement, the freedom to look for a better opportunity or company, the freedom to transfer from jobs to another jobs of your choice. If rights are being violated as a worker, I have limited access to justice. For my documents are attached to my sponsor, like what our sister said. If they decide to file a case against me, I cannot do anything. So workers facing absconding case or even theft cases is rampant here in the Middle East or in Kuwait. And most of the time, if I need to transfer to another employer and my present employer allows me, then I need to pay them a big amount, a certain amount, for them to release me. We call it release, but actually it's transfer of employer. So Kafala system becomes an opportunity for visa trading, human trafficking, bribery, and so on.
So what kinds of, again, from my previous conversation with Vani, what I understand is that, I mean, a lot of these countries would just shut down if the migrant labor force stopped working one day. I mean, this is something we say in the US, but in countries like, I think the UAE, where I don't know what it is, but it's like maybe 80% plus of the population is not local Emiratis. Like they're literally running the country. Yeah. So what jobs are they doing? I mean, it would seem like they're doing pretty much everything. So when I'm asking like who makes use of the Kafala system, I mean, what kinds of work are the workers doing? Yeah. And also, I mean, is this primarily like manual labor, construction, domestic work, or is this all the way up to like professional, like doctors and people working in like white collar jobs? And who also on the other side is benefiting from it? Who are the people that are making the money off of this? Vani or Anne, either one of you.
Okay. Shall I go, Anne?
Yes, please, Vani.
Yeah.
After Vani, I think Esther also.
Okay. Does Esther want to go first? Okay.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't say who's making use of the Kafala. I think it's a Kafala the government's using Kafala to control everyone. Every single foreign worker who comes in falls under the Kafala system. What happens is if you're in a white collar job or in a professional job, you have social capital, you have financial stability, you have better negotiation powers within the Kafala system. But if you're a lower income worker coming in, having paid huge amounts of money going into debt to migrate to the Gulf, you don't have those kind of privileges to negotiate your system. But every foreign worker falls under the Kafala system, except a tiny, tiny minority which might be in free zones. But this is common for all of them. And countries like the UAE and Qatar, about 90% of the population, over 90% of the labor market are non-nationals. I just want to mention one thing that Sarah mentioned earlier about being undocumented. The problem with the kafala is becoming undocumented is a very easy thing because the individual is not able to renew their visas on their own accord. Only the sponsor, only the kafil is able to renew it. And if I have an employer who wants to save money, having brought me in, wants to save money and control my mobility, they'll simply not renew my visa, but continue to employ me, which means I'm undocumented. But when I'm caught, it is not the employer who's criminalized, it's the worker who's criminalized.
Okay, if I can let the women in Beirut to speak, you're on the microphone now.
Who is this? Is this Sarah or is this Esther?
This is Esther. This is Esther.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, as when we come here in Lebanon, when you come to work here under your kafara, or you can say your employer or boss, almost all guys, many, not almost, all of the guys that are coming to work under house help, housekeeping, mostly, they're doing housekeeping, of which that is contract, and no freedom. When you come to work that housekeeping, some of them, they lock them inside, no communication with your families, no time for resting. Some people, they work more than 12 hours, even 18 hours. Some would work from 6 in the morning until midnight. Or some they work until after 2. So when you look at the guys who are coming here for contact, they suffer more because we have no freedom, no communicating with your family. And some people, they'll give you only once in a month to communicate with your families, of which is very difficult for them. And sometimes you can find when they work, they don't pay them. You can work even, some of them, they have worked even almost 1 year, they have not paid them. Like on my own experience, when I came first time, they told me no communication, pay my salary until I finished 3 months. But thank God enough, I had my own documents back from the agreement that we wrote when I was still in my country. I had still my papers with me. They took all my documents, but I had the agreement with me. So when they told me that, I told them, this is the agreement. According to the agreement, is 1 day off, but your salary, they must pay you monthly. But when you reach here, they change everything, not the way you're expecting to be.
That's a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you want to add anything?
I guess like the question was who's using the kafala system, right?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, I don't know, I was supposed to not send on a group, I guess, on Facebook, on Messenger, but as I said before, the ones who are using it are the two individuals, like the two parties were like employer and the employee. But now everything is controlled, as they say, controlled by the employer or it's all about the sponsorship and the kafala system. So yeah, I think that's it's insane. But those people are the ones who are using the kafala system still, and the ones who are the domestic live-in, like the ones who are living actually in the house.
Okay, thank you.
Got it. And Laila, I'm not sure how, we're kind of troubleshooting here. So if you want, I can kind of manage the questions while you manage the guests over the phone, or if you feel comfortable, we can switch off. Should I manage the questions?
Go for it. I'll jump in when I need to.
Okay. Yeah. If you feel that you can triple task, then go ahead. All right. So kind of a tweak on a question I was going to ask, because I'm starting to realize that we really need to make sure that we're talking about how people are first introduced to this system and what role their sending countries might play in this as well. We're focusing kind of on the story after people arrive, but I'd like to understand a little bit better in the case of the Philippines, in the case of African countries, India, the places where people are typically coming from. What role do the sending countries have in this, whether it's in the private sector with recruiters or at the governmental level? So I guess there's a number of ways that I could ask this question, but here's how I will ask it. Like, how were you first introduced to this opportunity in your home country? Anne, would you like to start?
Yeah. 20 years ago, I have no idea about Kafala System. It was not being discussed to us during our orientation when I applied for this job as a domestic worker. The promises that we heard from our agencies make us believe that we are going to land to what they call the dreamland. We migrated because of the lack of job opportunities in our country of our origin. That this job will only be my stepping stone to something big. But as time goes by, I realized that it's not that easy. That even if I have issues with my employers, I don't have the right to go back to my country without their permission. Because all my documents are with them. They take all our documents, including my passport. That I have no choice than to finish my contract, even my situation is no longer safe or the relationship is no longer healthy. That even if I want to have a day off, if they don't want, even if it is stated in my contract, then I don't have choice but to follow them.
And were you recruited by a Filipino
recruitment
organization? But who
No,
were they?
it's
Filipino?
a
Were they?
recruitment agency. It's a Philippine recruitment agency. So everything is not being discussed. We don't have any idea. Any single domestic worker doesn't have any idea about Kafala system. What they thought is they will just come here in abroad and work and finish the contract. That's it. And they even promises the worker of a lot of things like, you can use your telephone, you have your day off, you have your bonuses, you have this and that. And in fact, actually, it's not, it's different, different story when you are already in the country.
And did you have to pay a sum of money to your employer or to anyone in order to be able to go to Kuwait?
In the Philippines, we don't have the salary deduction, especially for the domestic workers. They don't allow it. But before 2000, they are asking for your 3 months salary. But now, it's not anymore practiced.
So I would like to extend the same question. And I know that Esther, I believe, started to answer this question already, but I would like to give her a chance to answer more fully if she'd like. So Esther or Sarah, how were you introduced to this opportunity, for lack of a better way to put it? Who told you that you could come and work in Lebanon? How did you find out about this? Did you have to pay anything to be able to pursue this job?
No, for me, I can say no. In our country, they don't ask you to pay anything, but it depends which country you are going. There are some countries when you go, they ask you to pay some certain amount. A place like Dubai, they ask some guys to pay, and maybe that work, maybe you are doing security, or maybe they're taking you to a restaurant. That one you must pay. There's a down payment of which some guys they ask them for let me say it's $40, and the man is $150. If you want to travel to Qatar. But here in Lebanon, you don't pay anything. But when we reach here in Lebanon, your kafala will tell you, your sponsor will tell you, you have to stay for 3 months, as I said, so that they can pay back the money that they used to brought you here. And after some of them, they will not pay you that 3 months. Some they'll pay you, some they will not pay you 3 months salary. They'll say it's the cost that they used to bring you in Lebanon.
That's correct.
So that was Esther, and now we're hearing from Sarah.
Yeah, so Sarah, by the way, and I'm gonna add, it's just also there is a difference between countries. Like let's say in Ethiopia, I mean for me it's different, completely different as I came when I was only 16. But there's no knowledge of the kafala system. All they say about is, okay, you will go there, you work, and you help the family. That's all they know. I'm saying they because I didn't come as a domestic worker. I was really tricked by my own family. when I come, I was 16, but they put like different age, bring me here anyway. But there is no knowledge of any kind of knowledge of the Kafala system that's happening here in Lebanon, your country. Like in my country, there is no knowledge about the Kafala system. They said, okay, you go there. Even the ones who have the little knowledge, they say, okay, you will go there. There's an agency. You will choose you a house, and then you go. You work. Yeah.
So a question I would have. Sorry, go ahead.
Also,
Go ahead.
You paid, as she said, you paid when you come to Lebanon.
Okay. So a question I would have is isn't anybody warning you who's already gone through this? Like, or maybe if you don't have friends, I guess, who have experienced this already, then you would have no contact. But have you all reached back to your communities back in your sending countries and warned them so that they know what to expect if they come?
As for me, yes, of course, I will. Sorry.
Same to me. I've been warning many of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sarah?
So as for me, if I ever go back to my country, of course, I'm gonna tell them to do not ever come here, first of all, but then also I have to explain why and how it goes, because I don't ever wish to my enemy to come to these countries, and especially for the Kafala system. And I have to also tell everyone that as possible as I can have many people tell them how the Kafala system works and the slave, I can say, that's going on in Lebanon.
And to make it clear for our audience, because some people may hear this and say, well, then if you don't like it, why don't you just leave? And I understand that you don't have your papers. Is that correct?
It's a bit of joke that I have been hearing it since long time ago. But one, since I'm not documented, I'm not able to leave without going back to my employer. And if she decided to let me go, she let me go. If she decided to put me in prison, I have to go to prison. And plus, for me, I especially have a Lebanese son, and I am not allowed to go with him, to take him, or either I am not allowed to stay here undocumented. So it's very complicated for me, but also if normally the Kafala system has to take you back to your employer if you are undocumented, and also if the employer decided to let you stay here in prison, it's their right to do it. And if they want you to be repatriated, immediately they will do it. It's up to them to decide what you will do after.
Okay.
Okay, I will add something. As Sarah said, like now we are undocumented, we cannot go back home. But before all this, before we started, the corona came. And then we have the issue with the dollars. We used to pay penalty. If you want to go home, you'll go to your consulate or the office where you came through, or to your kafara. You pay the penalty. We used to pay penalty. As Kenyans, we used to pay $200 per year. If you have stayed here like 10 years, that is $1,000. Like for me, I'm 6 years now in Lebanon. So we used to pay penalty. And apart from penalty, as our consulate is always, because here they go with the weather. Sometimes ticket is high, sometimes it's low. But for us Kenyans, our ticket is always fixed $500. So you can imagine maybe somebody has stayed here 10 years, people have stayed here 10 years, some even more than that. How will somebody get more than 1,000, 2,000 to pay your tickets to go back home? It's very difficult. Like me, I have some cases now, even I have some documents of one of our Kenyan girl. She was here. She paid her penalty $1,400 plus her ticket. And when you go to immigration for investigation, our consulate will tell you, when you reach there, say, you are not staying outside, I'm helping you. You are staying in the church, I help you people, I dress you people, I feed you people. So I don't say even you gave me any money. So you see now, bring confusion between us. And when this girl came out, she came out from the investigation, consulate asked her to add more money, $200 on top of $1,400. When the girl said he doesn't have the money, he asked the consulate to give her back her money, to come and look for $200, and then she'll go back. It brings big problem. They beat her until they called even the police and they arrested her. They deported her back to Kenya. And with us, even if they arrest you, you have to pay ticket by yourself. it's not the government in Lebanon they pay for, or your employer or your kafara. Some of them, those who have that human heart or good heart, they pay for you to get and go home. Some of them is none of their business, and even they can put a case on you. But us, sometimes when they arrest some Kenyan girls, as a group, when things used to be good, we used to contribute for ourselves. We help somebody and we send them back home. So like now the girl, she went and her money, all $1,400 remained here in Lebanon. So that's what even us we are facing now. Like many Kenyan girls, like now we have cases. We have my sisters are sleeping in the streets now, Kenyans. Some of them, they paid their money since 2016. They wanted to travel, go back home. Our consulate to help them to get only less per se. There's a first, our consulate from immigration to our consulate just to put a stamp for them to go back home. And they were ready to pay. They were ready to pay the penalty and the ticket. But our consulate did not help them at all. And that's why it has made many guys now, they're sleeping in the street. They're homeless, they're jobless. They cannot afford again to pay ticket and go back home. So it's not easy. The way Sarah said, I cannot advise anybody to come in Lebanon. I was in Saudi first time. I can say Saudi is much better. If I compare Saudi and Lebanon, I can say Saudi is much better because I was there before. I can say Saudi is much better, at least. But in Lebanon, I cannot allow anybody. I cannot even I cannot advise anybody to come in Lebanon.
Okay. Thank you both for sharing. And from what I'm understanding, it sounds like there is complicity or at least just neglect taking place at multiple levels, that this isn't just on the part of an employer, that this is a system, it's systemic abuse. So there have to be different elements that are propping this up and perpetuating it. And I want to make sure that you have a chance to answer this too, because I don't think that we've given you an opportunity to speak to. Have you warned anybody back home in the Philippines? What are you telling people back home?
Yes, actually, we have our campaign in 2013 to have a moratorium, suspension of sending domestic workers here in Kuwait. Why? Because of the abuses, because of the maltreatments that the workers are receiving. So we have the campaign during that time. We have even petition. We do everything. We campaign. We even shame our government just to stop the sending of the domestic workers back then, because we don't have a domestic workers law in 2013. So what we did is we have a signature campaign signed by almost 15,000 workers here in Kuwait, asking our government to stop sending domestic workers here in Kuwait before. But now, things there are a lot of changes, like the domestic workers law. We have the domestic workers law. At least there is a clearer process on how to access to justice here in Kuwait, at least.
All right. Thank you all for your answers on this question. And something that you bring up, Anne, is actually a good segue into the next thing that I want to ask. And that is, you both represent more than yourselves. I mean, your own stories are compelling enough, I think, to give anybody pause and start to question this system and the different institutions and players that perpetuate it and enable it. But given that you are working within organizations and that you are advocates, let's take a moment to advocate for the other people in your communities. So there, from what I understand, again, going back to my podcast episode with Vani and my own research, is that people who are caught up in this system can be subject to all manner of horrific abuses. That this isn't just economic exploitation we're talking about here. It's sexual harassment and rape of domestic workers who are stuck in the house of their employer 7 days a week, who has their passport and complete control over their lives. This is migrant laborers who are doing construction work, primarily men, who can be stuck in camps that are way outside of like line of sight of the majority of the population, or of anybody who might be able to observe them, and maybe and intentionally so, and living in horrendous conditions. So in slave-like conditions. So I don't know how much of any of these things describe your personal experiences, but the fact remains that they are a part of the experience of people under the Kafala system. Can you speak to And I guess let's go back to you. And to start, can you speak to what types of abuses people are subjected to? I mean, if you have time to kind of walk us through some examples, what happens to people aside from just being manipulated, maybe losing their documentation and having their money taken? What are people having to put up with? Anne, that's for you.
Okay. Yes. Actually, we encountered almost all kinds of cases from abuses, rape cases, everything. So, I will just tackle it in general. For example, in domestic workers, they cannot transfer. Of course, they cannot transfer to any work that they want without the permission of the employer. But on the other hand, if the employer wishes her to be transferred to another employer, she cannot do anything, even if it is not with her consent. So you can check the documentary that we conducted to make it to have a clearer picture of the situation. We have a documentary with BBC News. The title is Silicon Valley Online Slave Market, for you to have a clearer picture. So if there are labor violation or abuses and the worker runs away to seek help and the employer filed an absconding case, then the worker lost already the opportunity to access to justice. She then now become the violator instead of victim. She is the violator now. And it is subject to imprisonment and deportation. Actually, even the PAM, or the Public Authority Manpower, they have a report that says that there are employers filed a false case against a worker to evade from the responsibilities like wages and other serious violations. We have workers who are working outside the house. For example, salon workers, cleaners, laundry workers, schools, tailors, etc., which is under the domestic workers law. They are not domestic workers, but they are under the domestic workers visa. But it is forbidden based on the labor law in Kuwait. But it is very rampant here in Kuwait. Even if the worker does not want does know that the status is illegal, that them performing the job is illegal, but they cannot do anything because the employer doesn't want to transfer them to 18 visa. So again, it is not the fault of the worker, but they suffer. It is the fault of the employer, but the worker suffers. That is also what Bani says. A worker cannot travel back home if they want because their passport or civil ID is being confiscated by the employers. Although there are employers who are following the law also. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I am about to post a link to where people can find the documentary, the BBC documentary that you're referring to. And they will also be able to find, I've also just posted a link to my previous interview with Vani, because I referred to that several times already. People can find that on the website as well. That'll give them a lot of background information on the Kafala system. And if you follow the link that I'm about to post to our website, also it will provide you with a link to the documentary and a bunch of other organizations and educational resources so that you can bring yourself up to speed and also take action. Laila, do we have any answers on your end as far as what kinds of abuses people have been subjected to in their communities?
Esther and Sarah, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Would you like to speak about abuses that workers are facing under the Kafala system?
Yes, of course. Yes, of
Is this
course.
Esther?
Okay. Here in Lebanon, I can say. Pardon?
Yeah, I'm here.
If you can just announce your
Okay,
name before you
okay.
speak, since they can't see you.
Okay, this is Esther. I can tell you abuses that girls are passing in Lebanon. Most of them, the abuses that they go through, you can find somebody who is employed, you are mister want to use you, which has to mistreat you, they beat you. Like now as I'm speaking now, I have one girl in my house, her mister, she's just only 6 months in Lebanon. She was beaten and they threw her in the road. Some of them, their mister, they use them to sleep with them. and they tell them you should not say anything. As our own consulate is sending girls. If you go there and tell the consulate you have problem, it's telling you go and do prostitution to get money so that you can go back home. And some of them, they overwork you. Like for me, when I came to contract, I came as a house help, but I was working in the house because my mister was having a restaurant and he had an office. So I used to work in the house. After, when I finish working in the house, I will go to the restaurant. I go and clean until in the evening. Tomorrow morning, I'll go in the, it's like I was rotating in the house, in the restaurant, and in the office. And no food. They don't give you food. Some of them, they don't give you food. No clothes. Some of them, they're sleeping outside in the balcony, and the balcony is open, just in the ground. No anything to cover yourself, nothing to put to cover yourself.
Okay, this is Sarah, by the way. I'm just gonna add a little bit of what she said. So the thing is that from the beginning, we don't have our rights. We don't know our rights. That's why we go through this and we don't ever speak. We either cut it off by committing
Salon
suicide
workers.
or running away. Like I can explain what I mean. Like for example, as my personal experience from before, my employer, he was harassing like sexual harassment, but I didn't go into it. But let's just say the other realities that mainly being happening here. They got into disrespect. They get into sexual harassment, physical beaten by actually very beaten, and I'm seeing a lot and I'm hearing a lot. It's not only by experience. The main one are like physical, being beaten by the employer, being raped, being harassed. So you can't even say anything about it, and they can also throw you in front of your consulate if you don't like it. By as she said, like sometimes I get patients, I got cases where they've been throwing in front of my own consulate naked, literally. Like that's insane. Okay, I know that this is not something new. They do that at home, but their workers don't know their rights and they never speak out, so they choose to die. Of course, if such things happen to me, if I'm not being told that this will happen to you or else, and I didn't go on my behalf, knowing that I would be going through this, I wouldn't go. But look, there is no one get into this kind of harassment and talking, because one, you don't have access to any kind of your family related, and then two, when you don't, when you talk to your agency, let's say the agency reverses that to you, on you, and even will be more aggressive with you, and they return you to that abusive employer, and you have no choice but saying like, okay, if my agency is not helping, if this is not helping, and if I say nobody can hear me, my life is useless. That's why they commit suicide. At least twice in week, 2 women at least in week they will be committing suicide, and some of them being thrown by their employer, but they say, of course, suicide. I don't know. I know I said a lot, but this is a reality.
Oh, it's so
Yes,
that's
true.
so
Because
important.
as we have one case, we have a case. Even I still have the tape for that girl, a Kenyan girl. The mister tried to force her to have sex with her, but she refused. They threw her from the balcony. I remember that time I was working in the hospital as a cleaner. We took care of that girl until she traveled. We still have her picture. They threw her from the balcony from 4th floor. It's only God saved her life, but she was not okay at all. Even when she traveled to Kenya, I remember even the mister came in the hospital when we were there, trying to threaten her, tell her, if you say I'm the one who did, you will not go alive in your country. On which she's still in the hospital, helplessly, but the boss is still harassing her.
Well, thank you both for being so brave to share that information. It's very important that we know the realities, and I know it's very hard to talk about these things, but we really appreciate you being so courageous. And I'm sorry for all of these things that you've experienced. Everyone that's listening to the call, it's very, very tough.
I want to just also, I want to paraphrase what we just heard again, because at times the connection is a little bit difficult. I'm not sure if everybody who's listening can hear, but I heard enough to understand clearly what was just described by Esther. She's saying that somebody, and correct me, Esther, if you're hearing me and I'm wrong, but what I heard was that someone was sexually harassed, pressured into, their boss attempted to pressure them into sex, and they refused, and they were thrown off of a balcony. And while they were in the hospital trying to recover from their injuries, their boss came to the hospital and continued to harass them, saying that they would not make it alive back to their country, which is just inhuman.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, it's correct.
Okay.
That was 2016.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody heard that story loudly and clearly. So I want to also pose a question that's been given to us by somebody in the audience, and it's somebody who's in Beirut. How they're asking, how can we be better allies? What can we do to help the guests here, aside from just getting the word out? Do you want other Lebanese? Do you want Kuwaitis and other people, expat workers in Kuwait? Do you want people to join you in the streets to protest? I pose this to all of our guests, and to Vani as well, as far as your experience in dealing in advocacy with this. Like, what can people do to help? And it's all well and good to hear something like this, to share these videos, which we really hope that people do. But what practical steps can people take? Please go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, for me, I think it's a good idea if we bring people from different countries to come and help us protect for our rights for the workers. It will be better. I think they may be from those voices of many people, different countries, different people. Maybe they can act something, even if they'll not do it immediately or they'll not do it 100%. At least on my side, I think it will be much better. I'll use just a sample. The way as we have just done we have started our own as a Kenyans, only few of us. At least you can see even the government is reacting now. At least things are trying to move forward. But if we say we'll do by ourselves, we cannot do it. But if we join ourselves with some people, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, Sarah, by the way, I don't know why I keep saying by the way. Sorry. I'm just gonna add on what Esther said a few minutes ago. I want people to let the world know what's going on with the Kafala system. I know that it's also difficult for some people to come. Of course, I'm not going to say physical, at least in social media. Let the world know about it. Just let them know on what's the Kafala system and how people are dying from it. Just raise our voices.
Yeah.
I want to interject here really quickly before posing this question to our two other guests, because there's something I think that's important just in the awareness raising element here. I mean, we talk about raising awareness a lot and question whether it really has much efficacy. But in this case, what I understand, again, from my previous conversation with Vani, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vani, is that what can happen is that one country will be given some sort of preferential treatment as people who can benefit from this system. And as soon as the residents or the citizens of that country start to self-advocate, organize, well, then they're just excluded and another company is chosen to be exploited. So this is why actually raising awareness is not just kind of an empty gesture. It actually matters, because if citizens of countries all over the world, particularly in the global south and possible sending countries, are made aware of this before their citizens start to be exploited, then people can be protected. It actually does make a difference. If this is just treated as like an isolated case of abuse between one receiving and one sending country, and it just stays an insular problem, then it will just continue to migrate, like literally, to other countries, where other citizens will just be chosen for abuse until they're used up, so to speak, and then other people, or until they organize, and then other people are targeted. Correct me, Vani, if that's a fair characterization of like the pathology at work behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. And which is why I think Gulf countries push for bilateral agreements instead of actually making labor reforms. And those bilateral agreements have a life cycle. And sometimes at bilateral, you were asking earlier, who takes the message of recruitment to you back home? It's a recruitment agent, yes, but it's also the government. So you'll have a bilateral agreement between Saudi and Uganda, where the Ugandan government will put pressure on its citizens to migrate to the Gulf, or the Bangladeshi government putting pressure on its women to migrate to Saudi as domestic workers. So there is that as well. And I think the bilateral agreement and that model, which unfortunately even international NGOs are pushing for, or even UN mechanisms look into, is not going to bring about sustainable change. And if I could just add, and I'm sorry, I know you should be speaking about this, about allies. The one thing that I want to tell people is you need to speak up stand up to your friends and to your family, because employers do have impunity. And there was a case in Kuwait where an employer blinded her domestic worker, and a few years later, she was allowed to recruit another domestic worker, and she abused her as well. So it's basically like you can get away with murder in most of the cases. So while those are the bigger abuses where you're talking about physical, mental, sexual abuse, rape, what we don't give enough attention to is the day-to-day abuse, which is internalized as par for the course. This is all in a day's work, which means you work upward of 16 hours, you're going to be underpaid, you're going to be screamed at, you're going to be, denied access to communication, you're not going to be given an off day. All of those things are not considered grave enough by most people, because the focus is on when you can see the abuse or when you can see the lack of payment. So I think it's really important for us to consciously look at all kinds of abuse that includes what will look like a normal day's job, and it isn't.
Anne, would you like to speak to the question of how people can be better allies to you and to the community that you're working to represent?
Yeah. Actually, here in Kuwait, it is not allowed to have some rally or to have some this kind of movements, But we are just lucky that we are able to work with the local NGOs or local organizations here in Kuwait, as well as the international organizations, which helps us a lot in what is this in creating a tool or a solution to the problems. Before, the problem is we don't have the domestic workers law, and in 2015 we have the domestic workers law because of the help of these organizations, the local and the international organizations. So talking about the problems, talking about the rights is very important. It is very important also to have a collective voice to call for an amendment of existing law or the proper implementation of the existing law, because there is law already. So we need to push them to implement it properly, because sometimes the problem is everything is written beautifully in the paper, but when it comes to implementation, it's a different story. So we need to talk about it's a must to talk about the rights of the domestic workers, of the migrant workers, as well as the Kafala system.
Oh,
all right.
Thank you.
I think we've covered everybody with this question. Is that right, Laila?
I believe so.
So if you want to get in a question in the last few minutes here before we have to start closing things up, Laila, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Anne, Esther, and Sarah about what encouraged you to speak up. Like, I'm sure it's very scary to speak up. What kind of gave you the courage to take the risk to start talking about these situations that you faced as workers and that are faced by however many others that are in the same field that you found yourself in when you migrated to Kuwait and to Lebanon? Esther and Sarah, could you answer that question?
Okay, for me, I can say what made me to do that.
Yeah, what gave you the courage to talk?
Because what give me the courage is because I've passed a lot, I've seen a lot what girls are going through, and I think I have that heart that I feel people pain more than my own. I've been helping different countries. I stay with them in my house, so some they're afraid to talk. They're afraid that when they talk, something might happen. They'll arrest them. But for me, I always get that courage. I say I will speak the truth, and I will stand for those who are weak. In case they arrest me, I'm ready, because they will not deport me outside my country. They'll deport me in my country, but I will stand with the truth, and I will stand very strong, and I'm ready to face anything. I don't fear. I'm ready to face anything, but I'm ready to say the truth and to help those who are behind me, and those maybe will come before me, after me.
And did you start talking, Esther, after you left the family you were working with?
Pardon?
Did you start speaking once you left the family you were working with before?
Yes, not a long time ago. When I came out, I stayed like 1 year. I called them. Because when I came here, I did not go to work direct to my sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
When I came here, they tell me, in Lebanon, if you're not a Lebanese, you're not allowed to bring a worker from outside the country. So when I came here, it's Lebanese. I'm under Lebanese, but I was working with a Syrian guy.
Okay.
So when I left, I used to call the Syrian man, talk to him, because I passed jail. They arrested me, they beat me, even they break my hand. I have a mark in my leg. So when I came out, the Syrian lady, when I was working in a house, was a very good lady to talk to me. I used to communicate with her. So when I came out, I used to talk to the Syrian family. So one day I wanted to go back home. I wanted to fix my papers. I have to call the Lebanese guy. I called him. He was somehow harsh to me. But I went back to MCC people to help me to talk to him. So since then, I've not talked to them anymore.
For those of you who don't know MCC, it's called, it's like anti-racist movement. Had any of you heard about anti-racist movement?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
They're shaking their heads yes on the camera.
Yeah. So MCC is Migrant Community Center. That's what she was talking about.
Thank you for clarifying. Sarah, can you talk about what gave you the courage to speak about these issues as well?
Yes, of course. For me, it's more about others than mine, because besides what's happened to me when I was here since day one, I work with an NGO who's working with medical. I'm working with medical NGO, so I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of people going through this whole thing, and other than what I told you, there are a lot of things they go through and they don't speak. They're very weak and they're afraid. I have no idea how they are very mentally sick because of afraid, their stress and so on. So I can't see that and walk away. I have to stand for them. It's not mainly for me, but it's mainly for the ones, as Esther says, who are weak to speak, who are afraid to tell the truth. So mainly that's the only thing that makes me speak out, actually.
Thank you. And as you all described the various abuses that domestic migrant workers face, I mean, it makes a lot of sense why people would be afraid. Like I think Vani said, you can get away with murder. And so people are more encouraged to live these abuses rather than to lose their lives. But we're really grateful to you and to Anne and to Vani for being such tremendous advocates and activists around this issue. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Back over to Sarah.
Anne, what gave you the courage to come forward? And
Yeah.
I'm sure you're taking some risks.
Yeah. I will just add to the last answer that I have which is very important. Organizing the sector is very important. Organizing the sector. So says about the MCC. I went there to MCC, and actually we copy some of the programs that they have. So we are organizing now not only the Filipino but also other nationalities, the domestic worker, which is I think is very important for the migrant workers in order to change the situation, you know. So to your question, based on the experiences I encountered when I work as a domestic worker and also the data we gathered through the experiences of other domestic workers, this keeps us going. So we decided to form the group in 2008. We don't have the law before. We don't have the clearer path how to access justice. Um, so what we did is we start talking about the rights. We start talking about the domestic workers law, the Convention 189, which is the only convention for the domestic worker. We started shaking and shaming our
This is a
government.
UN convention, or what convention
Yes,
is this? Just to be clear.
yes. We started shaking and shaming the government, our government, for them to know what's happening in the ground. We rescued workers almost every day. We study and learn from the experiences we have during the process. We started connecting with international organizations. We got so lucky that we also able to penetrate with the local organizations here in Kuwait, like the international organization like ILO, FES, IDWF, the local organization like the Social Work Society, and others. We are still working with them right now, at the present. Um, we are present in almost all talks that tackles the domestic worker sector or the migrant worker sector in general, to have a representation, which is very important, because how can they know our experiences, how they can know our situation if nobody will represent us or them. So we start organizing the sector. We spread awareness about their rights as a worker, stated the law, or we have the handbook and everything. So when it comes to harassment or risk, we have our share also. Yes, we experience that too, but not on the side of Kuwait government. Actually, we are working well with the Kuwait government, with the MOI, with the Ministry of Labor, but on the side of our government. So harassment from some recruitment agencies, we cannot blame them because they have interest to protect too, but they cannot blame us too because we are just fighting for the rights and welfare of the worker. So that is our main concern. So until now, we are still fighting, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you. First of all, I wish that we had more time, as I do with all of these conversations. I know that there are so many other things that we could have covered if we had twice the time or more. Thank you to all of our guests today for your courage in doing the work that you're doing in your lives and in your busy lives. When you already have the stresses of your work environment to deal with, you're also taking on role as advocates, and it's some personal risk as well. So I want to thank you for your trust, for your openness, for your hard work, for your courage, all of these things. I want to thank Vani for speaking to me all those months ago and doing our first episode on this topic and educating me and introducing me to the subject, and for her work with other organizations. And one thing that I also want to point out to everyone is that there is a lot more to this than what we've been able to cover here today. And you have an opportunity to continue to educate yourself and also to take action and to support the women that you've heard from today and their organizations. And you can do that by going to the website, latitudeadjustmentpod.com / is it live? It's live now, / live. And you can find a link to all of the different resources that have been mentioned, I believe, on today's show. So just go to that link, latitudeadjustmentpod.com / live, and look for this event. We'll also be posting the video, if not today, then tomorrow, But right now, you can already find a link that will take you to a number of different organizations, Anne's organizations that are working in Lebanon as well, and also Vani's organization, migrantrights.org, documentary films, articles, all of that stuff. So your journey of understanding and support does not need to stop at the end of this episode. Please take the advantage to go and also listen to our earlier conversation. That's episode 49 of Latitude Adjustment Podcast. You can find that on the website under the link for podcasts, or you can just subscribe to the podcast. And that's on most podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and most of the stuff you'd find on your Android phone. Anything else you can think of that I've left out, Laila?
I just want to add one more personal thought. Again, I echo the thanks of Eric to each one of you, Esther, Sarah, and Vani. I will say, as a Lebanese American, I really I look to
Anne.
I said Anne. Oh, you thought I said and. I said Anne. And of course, but as a Lebanese American, I ask my fellow Lebanese. I know the country is going through a lot right now in the aftermath of an explosion, which we covered last week. And I encourage you to look to that episode as well to understand the situation. And remember that it also impacts the women on the call with me in Beirut and other communities. This is an important topic, regardless of the situation right now on the ground. And we don't want to forget these people who might get lost in the larger conversations that are happening. And I encourage, of course, our community to take a hard look at the things we might have seen growing up in Lebanon or visiting Lebanon in terms of having migrant workers in our homes and our cousins' homes, and really think about the situation and how we can be doing better for our fellow humans. So I just wanted to add that.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you again to all of our guests.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
I just want to tell Laila, you were so determined and God said on us.
I needed to have Sarah and Esther on.
Yeah.
I never would have thought of that solution, and it worked perfectly.
So glad.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
If we can ask our guests to stay on for a moment, we're going to end the broadcast. Thank you to all our viewers.